welcome. Glad you're here. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, first of all, I have so much thanks in my heart for Pastor Jeff Schrank and all the incredible people here at Christ Church Lutheran. It is an amazing privilege that we have been able to, some of us, enjoy for over a decade now, and then others that are new, and it's refreshing, it's exciting, it's encouraging. I pray that your Holy Spirit would move in a mighty and powerful way in every single workshop that is happening right now. And I have lots of friends and even a family member that's doing them, and pray that it would all be to your glory, and that we might benefit, Lord, from these best practices, and pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. So, I believe that I have about 45 minutes or so of information to share with you, which should leave about the same amount of time for questions and answers. I've done this workshop or something very close to this now. This is the third time that I've done it, and I discovered that there are a lot of questions about this topic. So the first time that I did this workshop was in February of 2020. Oh yeah, I was going to say, well, that would make this 4, but no, we missed one somewhere along the way because of this thing called COVID. But the first time I was here doing this workshop, I was here with my congregational president and the pastor that was succeeding me, and we were here to basically say that I had just passed the baton to him in January of 2020. And we were here a month later, and I was telling everybody how great things were going. That was a month after. Now, does anybody wonder how things are going 3 years after? I am so thankful to say, beyond my wildest expectation. I'm blown away how much God has blessed us at King of Kings with where we are, 3 years now down the road. And what's a blessing about that is, of course, how great the church is doing, but it's in light of the fact that this thing doesn't always go so well. Pastoral leadership transition can be an extremely difficult thing. And so I don't want to dwell on how it can go wrong in this workshop. I'd like to share with you, I think, some ways that it might go well. Some of you, how many pastors are in the room? Okay, so that feels like about half maybe. Someone asked, is this just for pastors that are getting ready to retire? And the answer is no, although that's kind of the entry point for me, because as soon as I pass the baton to my successor, my church blessed me with the opportunity to begin to minister to the church at large. And so starting in October of 2020, I began to work with pastors and staffs and boards and churches who were kind of going through this. And I was learning at the same time that I was helping other people know what I was learning. So I'm 3 years down the road now. I sure don't know everything, but I have learned a lot. And so what I share with you today is based on my own experience, my own observation, reading the books that are out there on this topic, listening to the podcasts that I become aware of, and working now with probably somewhere around 15 to 20 congregations over these last several years. And now in my retirement, this is what I hope to do. It's how I hope to stay busy beyond enjoying time with my dear wife, Sharon, who's here in the room, and our 5 grandkids that are living in our Omaha region. And so anyway, I'm so thankful. So you have a little outline there, and I'm just going to follow that. If you have a question along the way that's just burning and you can't wait till the end, just raise your hand and we'll ask it. Otherwise, make note of your questions and we'll get to them at the end. So, the first thing is perspective. You must get the real picture. You need to get the real picture about this topic. Even before you start planning, I think it's helpful to have a mindset or perspective that's going to help you prepare for what's ahead. So what's ahead? What do you need to see? What do you need to have the perspective on before you start? Here's several things. One, there is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all transition. In other words, every single congregation is different. Just like people are different, churches are different. And I think that's what's one of the things that's kind of exciting for me in working with churches is every time I hear the story of a new church, I think, oh my gosh, that's totally different from any of the other churches that I've worked with, which is exciting. But because of that, there's no top 10 things that you need to do and you'll be successful. I think pastoral leadership transition or other leadership transitions, because not all of you in here are pastors and some of you are getting ready to transition out and someone's coming in. I think it's almost more of an art than a science. Or you could say it's more of a process than an event. It's a journey to a place rather than just jumping right to the destination. It just involves a lot of time. It's unpredictable. It can be messy and complex and complicated. I think it also is likely not to take the time that you think it will take. I think in maybe 10% of the cases that I'm familiar with, it took just about the right amount of time that everybody thought it would take. 10%. 10% maybe takes less time than they thought. But 80% of these, it takes more time than you might have thought it would take. So some of you that are in the room, you're looking ahead, you're wondering, gosh, I think I'm 4 years out. Great. It's not bad that you're here thinking about things that are 4 years out. It's also not bad that you're here if you got it coming up in a year or so. It's important that you're here. Also, and I mentioned a book, I think maybe the last time I did this, there's a book written by the authors William Vanderbloemen, 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 and Warren Bird. They are authors of, I think, the best book on this topic, which is very simply Next. And then the subtitle is, I think, Successful Pastoral Leadership Transition or something like that. And that book says almost every situation in a congregation that's going through a transition is going to be healthier if you bring a third party in. Now, there are lots of different potential third parties. Some in the room right now are intentional interim pastors. That is bringing in someone that's on site to help the church get from here to here. But there are all kinds of other sort of folks that can speak in to that, and that's what I'm doing now. I'm serving as a coach and a consultant for churches that are going through this, and it's a lot of fun. The other thing about this is that pastoral transition is not over when the new guy takes the helm. It's not done. In fact, it has been 3 years and a month since I passed the baton to my successor, and he and I are still meeting every 6 weeks. We're still meeting about every 6 weeks just to kind of talk about how things are going. Now, that's not going to be the case, obviously, for a pastor who retires and moves, 600 miles away. But in the case where the pastor that's retiring is still hanging around and the new guy's coming in, it's really, really important that communication stays very, very strong. So, just getting that perspective before you start, I think, is helpful. But it's actually not the first thing. The first thing is the next one. Pray, pray, pray. Get on your knees. Just like in light of in light of the statistics that don't always look very good, the same most pastoral leadership transitions don't succeed in light of all that, it can be easy to get discouraged. But you have something huge in your favor. Actually, more than something, you have someone that is huge in your favor, because the Lord isn't going to wake up, like tomorrow and go, oh my gosh, I forgot about Redeemer Lutheran Church. Oh, it's like He knows exactly what is going on at your particular church and what's going on inside of you. And so how it makes a lot of sense that we would make this a matter of prayer. Prayer is the most important thing than anything you'll hear me say about this. And our story involves that. I'm going to tell you my story a little bit, our church's story. In 2017, I was 62, and I had just started thinking about retirement when I was 67, so I was 5 years away. And I was just starting to think about it. I hadn't really told anybody except Sharon. And just thinking about it. And King of Kings, we're in Omaha, Nebraska. It's a larger church. There are 5 pastors on staff. I've been senior pastor about 25 years at King of Kings. And we had 2 young guys. And then me and my 2 buddies that have really been with me for like almost 25 years. It's just like crazy. Who are both my age. And within 3 months, both of the young guys got calls, and they both took them. And so now it's like, oh, wow, didn't see that coming. And so there's 3 of us left, and we're all 62. And so even though nobody said anything, everybody in the church, what are they thinking? The next guy coming in could easily be Mark's successor, right? So, but we had the idea, I'm 5 years away. I got a lot of gas in the tank yet. So how about this? How about if we start the call process, go for a great young pastor, gifted, talented, and bring him in, but no promises. Just kind of bring him in and see if he's got the chops to be a lead pastor of a large church. That was our idea. It was a good idea. Well, you can understand why we had that idea. It ended up not being a good idea because what happened was we ended up with 4 guys, just like super, like any one of them was like, wow, we had an all-star list of 4 guys. 3 of them took their names out of consideration. Anybody want to guess why they took their names out of consideration? 5 years, Mark's at the church, and he's looking at retirement 5 years from now.
Want to wait 5 years to be a lead pastor?
Right. And many of them were either already lead pastors of churches, or they were in the second chair, probably going to move into that first chair at the church that they were at. And why would they come to King of Kings with no clarity about what that's going to look like, right? But we didn't know that until we went all the way through the process, which was like 8 months. Painful. Started at the beginning of 18. It was early, actually, September. And the 4th guy on the list, the Lord just said to us in our call committee, probably just not the right time or the right fit. So we were done. And I remember as we were going into November and Thanksgiving and Christmas, and I looked around at our staff, I looked around at the team, I looked at the board, and we were out of gas. So I said, guys, let's just take a sabbatical from this searching for the next pastor thing, celebrate Thanksgiving, celebrate Christmas, and in the 2019, we'll start, or 2018, yeah. No, I've still got this wrong. 2019, we'll start over. So that's what we did. 2019, we started our year with 21 days of prayer. From the first day to the 21st of January. And we had been praying that whole 8 months of 2017, please God, show us the man. Show us the pastor. However you're going to do that, show us who that guy is. And we got to the end of it, and we didn't have the guy. And so in 2019, we prayed that, but we added to the prayer, we said, show him. Like stir him up. So that when we have conversations with him, God, get him ready just like you're getting us ready. Stir him up is what we prayed for 21 days. So, like 5 days later, I'm at the megachurch conference in Palm Springs, California, and I looked across the room and I saw this young pastor, and I just got this thought, what about Greg? So, Greg Griffith is in Macomb, Michigan at the time. I didn't know him that well, but I knew him a little bit. And so I went up to him, I said, Greg, you got a few minutes, like at our break? I just want to see how you're doing and chat and stuff like that. So he said, sure. So we got off to kind of a quiet place. And I said, well, how you doing these days? How's ministry going? Great. Having a great time. Yeah, and asked him about his church. Yeah, well, this is great. We're just having a great time. I could see me being there for a long time, but he said, but I don't know. Lately, I've just been stirred up, and it was like I heard those words, and I've never heard the audible voice of God. I'm not. That was about as close as I can tell you that I was hearing what I was just hearing God say. He's the guy. Now, I wasn't going to tell anybody that, I wasn't going to tell him that. But I said, Greg, we've been praying that God would stir up a pastor and that he would lead us to him. And are you interested in conversations? Well, that started a conversation. That was January 2019. By June of 19, our call committee, our board, our staff, our team, everybody that was involved in the process, our congregation, extended a call to him to become senior pastor elect, which meant that he was coming in August, and from August to December gave us 5 months to be together. And the idea was I would pour everything I possibly knew into Greg in those 5 months. And on January the 1st of 2020, I would pass the baton to him as now lead pastor. And what the board decided to do with me, this was amazing. They said, we're going to send you on a 9-month sabbatical. 9-month sabbatical. I never had a sabbatical my whole 40 years of ministry, so I guess we're just going to give you the whole thing all at once here. And I would say that, they were a part of it was giving me a sabbatical to bless me, but really it was mostly designed to get me out of there for 9 months. Let Greg blaze his own trail. I'm not around. I'm not in the room when people are having conversations. They're not looking at Greg and hearing what he's saying and looking over at me to see what my body language is doing. There's none of that. And it was really actually a brilliant, I think, and very wise thing that the board decided to do in that regard. Oh, did I mention that was January 2020? So Sharon and I had a fabulous sabbatical for the first 2.5 months. And I think Greg had a pretty nice first 2.5 months as lead pastor at King of Kings, and then, of course, COVID hit, which, looking back at it, God used that as an opportunity for Greg to just accelerate into his position as lead pastor. I watched how at his amazing leadership ability, and the church rallied around. It was beautiful. And then, get this, and this goes against maybe conventional wisdom. Some of you are going to go, you did what? After 9 months, the deal was, they told Greg, Mark's coming back, and he'll be on staff for 2 years, and you'll be the lead pastor, and he will be in a supportive position to you. And most people hear that and they think, that's dumb. That's really dumb. In our situation, and we'll talk about it more, maybe, it was just the right thing. But there were a lot of things that made it the right thing. It wouldn't always be the right thing. But in our case, it was. And so I came back in October of 2020. We had already agreed before I left, these are the things that we think I'm going to do. Greg and I agreed, the board agreed. And we had about 6 things that Mark will do when he comes back. And I did like 5 of those and 2 others that we hadn't thought of. And it was great. 2 years were great. And it gave me all kinds of opportunity to basically throw all of my support behind Greg. Countless times would I take the opportunity to publicly say, you know, I am 100% behind Greg. This is awesome, blah, blah, blah. And so it was really good until finally then, after 2 years, in November, I officially retired. And anyway, I think my whole point in all of that, it was to say, all of that, I think, was an answer to prayer. Just the way God did that was truly amazing. So, here's the third thing then. After you've gotten the right perspective, after you've gotten on your knees to pray, and by the way, that keeps going and should keep going, the next thing is plan. And that's getting ready. So what do you need to do to get ready? So I know undoubtedly you heard before, you know, if you fail to plan, you might as well plan to fail and all that. But let me give you some interesting statistics on pastoral leadership transition in North America. This is really crazy. 25% of denominational pastors in North America will retire, but they have no plan to do so. So 25%, 1 out of every 4 pastors in North America in denominations, which of course were included in that, basically they're saying, oh yeah, I know I'll retire sometime, but there's no plan for it. It just kind of happens without a plan. That's not good. Another 25%, this is really interesting, another 25% of denominational pastors do not plan to ever retire. They will die in the pulpit. They just, like, they're the guys that say, retirement's not in the Bible. So, I'm not going to retire. You know, I'll go out with a stroke in the pulpit. You know, they don't say that, but you know. So that's 50% of pastors in North America who are going to either retire or die where there's no plan. That's a problem. So what do we need to do to get ready? Now, I haven't read this in books. This feels like a revelation that the Lord has given to me that I think every time I've applied it, it's been true. But you have a little diagram in one of those pages that I call the readiness circle. And my conviction and my contention with what I've observed, with what I've practiced, and with all the conversations that I've had with churches where there is an intention for the pastor to retire. So let me just pause at that point to say, I'm now not describing the situation where Pastor, Jones is there, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, one day gets a call. And St. James Church somewhere is calling him. He's got the call to church there, and nobody saw it coming. Pastor Jones didn't see it coming. Now he's got the call, and he prays about it, and sure enough, God's calling him to go to St. James. So he says, I'm going. All right? Now, that's a situation that's not intentional, it's not planned, it just happens. I'm not talking about that scenario. I'm talking about now the scenario where, like in my case, or in some of your cases, whether you're a pastor or not, you can see that there is a day coming when you're going to retire, and you want it to go well, right? It's my contention that when we're talking about the church, it's the guy going out. It's his responsibility more than anybody else's to get everybody ready. And the first person he has to get ready is himself, believe it or not. Because there's confusion in the heads of some pastors about retirement, and in their own head. Like, gosh, should I retire? Should I not? Do I have enough gas? Am I worn out? Am I burnout? Should I keep going? And so there's a series of questions that I help that guy ask, okay? And they range from, honestly, is he financially ready? Is he spiritually ready? Is he emotionally ready? There's several really important questions for that guy to ask himself. What's really, really bad is when he thinks he's ready to retire and the board isn't ready for him to retire. Worse than that is when he's not ready to retire, but the board is ready for him to retire. That's bad. So, but I think in my case and in many cases of lead pastors of congregations that have staff people, it's got to be him. He's got to be the one to know that, first of all, he's ready. Now, pause for a moment. I'm a huge golfer. I love golf. And I don't know how many years it's been now. I think it's been at least 5 or 6 years. And the Masters tournament is being played at Augusta. And it's Wednesday, the day before the competition is going to start. And if you know anything about the Masters and the Wednesday, the day before the tournament starts, they have a very famous par 3 contest. And it's 9 holes of par 3, a par 3 course. But the cool thing and the fun thing about it is all these guys that are normally grinding and competitive, and it's fun. And they have their sons or their daughters or their grandsons caddying for them. And they're like some of them are little, tiny little kids, and they let them hit a shot, So anyway, one hole, Jack Nicklaus is playing with, I think he was maybe with Tiger, and 3 guys on this par 3, and Jack, is at the end. He's done winning tournaments. He's kind of older, and his grandson is caddying for him. And so instead of Jack hitting the ball, he tells his grandson to hit the shot. His grandson makes a hole in one. Wow. And the look on Jack Nicklaus's face was unlike any other look I ever saw on his face. I'm a fan of Jack Nicklaus from way back. He has won 6 green jackets at Augusta, 6 Masters tournaments. He's won 18 major tournaments. Looks like he's going to keep that record, and Tiger isn't going to get it. But when they asked him after that day, they said, "Okay, Jack, you're arguably the greatest golfer of all time. You've got 6 green jackets. You've won 18 majors. Where does this moment rank in comparison to all those?" And that's exactly what he said. By far the best. And I think what Jack was talking about is what I started feeling in the years before my retirement. I started getting, I still had tremendous joy, like preaching. I love preaching. But I got more joy out of equipping the young guys that were on my team to preach and sit there and watch what God was doing through that. I got more joy out of that. And that was one of the things that I knew God was getting me ready to let go of things when I kind of, that whole Jack Nicklaus thing, I said, oh, that's what's going on inside of me. So anyway, are you ready? The guy going out, he's got to be ready. I then believe it's also his responsibility in many, many cases to get the guy that's coming in ready. Now, obviously, this is not true if the guy coming in isn't there. Obviously, this isn't true if, as I described before, Pastor Jones gets a call out of the blue and just takes the call. Like, obviously, it's not true. But where it's planned and where it's intentional, in our case, I felt it was my job to get Greg as ready as I possibly could get him. And so that's what we did for 5 months. We were joined at the hip. Very purposeful, very intentional. I gave him as much information as I could, the history, the culture, the personality, the valleys, the mountaintops, my personal hopes, dreams and vision and all that stuff. And I think that if Greg were here today, he would tell you that 5 months for him was invaluable. And for me, it was just getting him ready. Well, that's the second circle. The third circle, and the fourth in some cases, kind of happening at the same time, is getting the board ready or getting the staff ready. And so I wanted to be real honest about that with the board and with the staff, and we had to be honest about some things. We had to be honest about grief. It's surprising how many people go into this whole thing and they have no concept of how this is going to be hard. People are going to grieve. Like the pastor is going to grieve, the pastor's wife is going to grieve, the staff is going to grieve, the congregation. At least I hope it would be that way. I hope the congregation is going, yes, finally he's gone. But there's going to be a grief. You better know that, because if you don't know that, you're going to foul some things up. You need to understand about allegiance, and so I remember there were times when we would be having meetings and having conversations, and it was curious to me that some of the staff members seemed to be reluctant to hear or follow or do what Greg was talking about. And I finally realized, I have to tell them that by transferring your allegiance to Greg does not mean that you're telling me that you don't care about me anymore. Like the best thing you can do for me is to follow that guy and transfer your allegiance to him. There are pastors and staffs, they don't know that. They don't know that. One of the metaphors or comparisons that we heard about, both Greg and I, on a podcast, was the guy going out talking with his incoming successor about the fact that this feels like a marriage and a funeral all at the same time. And so Greg and I, along the way, he'd look at me and he'd go, how's the marriage funeral thing going? It's like, yeah. So for me, it was always mostly marriage, it's a new relationship, future's out ahead of us, it's exciting, we love each other, we love what God's doing. And there's a little bit of sadness, a little bit of sorrow involved. So just to be able to identify that and to talk about that. And then to be able to tell him when we're going through something, just so you know, I'm in a funeral mode right now. And he would stop and we would talk about that and we would pray about that and say, okay. Also, got to be open and honest about financial issues, budget issues, salary issues, and I might talk about that just a bit later, when we're done, or in the Q&A time. Then that last circle, that fifth and final circle, and this one is appropriate chronologically in terms of the readiness circle. At some point, it's the right time to help the church get ready, the congregation get ready. You can talk to the church about this prematurely. I know some pastors that have started talking about their retirement from the pulpit years before they were getting ready to retire, and I was like, no. You probably don't want to share that with the whole church quite just yet. Maybe a few advisors and close people, but not the church. But when it comes time to let the church know, this is critically important. And so my mindset was the way that I can help get the church ready the most is by the way the church sees Greg and I interacting. And so we did lots of different things on this in this arena. We did visits in members' homes, like cocktail parties or wine and cheese or snacks, whatever, in members' homes where Greg and I were both there, and I was kind of introducing Greg to my friends. In a nutshell, the thing that I knew is if I could make my friends Greg's friends, This is going to go well. And so we did that. We did like pizza after services on a Sunday, and we would pepper Greg with questions, silly questions, and then people were able to text in their serious questions. But we did, silly stuff, just like, I don't know. It wasn't this, but I don't know why it's coming to my mind. But boxers or briefs, fruit or vegetables, Detroit Tigers. Okay, he loved the Detroit Tigers or Detroit Lions. Which one? So we did stuff like that. We also did, and you kind of have to be careful with this depending on what church you're at. But our church has a culture where our unwritten value at King of Kings is fun. It's joy. It's laughter. It's fun. So we would put things into the service that were fun. And I would say silly stuff. Like we did like a name that hymn or name that song thing where Greg's standing here and I'm standing here and we're competing with a bell in front of us, and they'd play the first 4 notes of a song and I'd hit the bell and say, well, that's thy strong word or whatever, although it wasn't that, but and then they would, anyway, that was fun. And other silly things, and here was the point of it all. If you are looking into the living room of a young family where there's mom and dad and 3 little kids, everybody's in the living room, and mom and dad are rolling around on the living room floor, laughing, tickling each other and whatever, what are those 3 kids thinking? Those 3 little kids are thinking, I'm safe. I'm secure. I feel good in this family. My mommy and daddy love each other. Now, Greg always said, you got to be careful when you use that. That's just weird. But the point was, if the congregation saw that Greg and I liked each other, we're laughing with each other, we're actually laughing at each other, or self-deprecating sort of stuff, I think it gave the congregation the feel, we're going to be okay. Because mom and dad, Greg and Mark, they really like each other. And I don't think that aspect, I would underestimate how important that was. And then the final Sunday, the Sunday when I passed the baton, I preached out of Numbers and out of Joshua, and I preached on Moses. There's not a lot of pastoral leadership transition biblical stories. There's not many. But there is the transition from Moses to Joshua. It's in there. And really, I said on that day, I see 3 things that God told Moses that were helpful for the transition of leadership. And then I see that God told Joshua 7 things. And I think I recall saying that the reason for that is that Moses was older and he could only get 3. Joshua was younger, he could remember 7. I'm older, I got 3, Greg's got 7. Anyway, it was funnier then. You had to be there. You had to be there, I guess. But it was, one of the things I remember is that God told Moses, assemble the congregation and tell them Joshua is the leader. It's powerful. It's there. And so I said, okay, so I'm no Moses, he's no Joshua, but we're assembling the congregation here, and I'm telling the congregation he's now your leader. And it was powerful. If you're at all close or you're going to be close, I'm sure I could get you the link of that message. It was very, very helpful for our church. All right, I'm motoring so that we can have questions and answers. The next one is communicate, which is get the word out. Communicate, communicate, communicate. I just think that we decided in this whole matter of communication with the board, with the staff, Greg and my communication with each other, and then especially with the congregation, we made a decision that if we were going to do anything, we were going to over-communicate. even if we didn't have something to communicate, we would say, we don't have anything to communicate yet. We just, almost every Sunday in this process, starting in 2019, when we started those 21 days of prayer, we just communicated all the time about where we were in the process. It was also a way for us to help the congregation know what they could be praying for. And we sent out all kinds of, frequently asked questions sheet, kind of a history sheet, what we'd been doing, what we were doing, what we were going to do, just all kinds of communication in the congregation, and I think that was also extremely important. The other thing that I wrote here is that when I came back from my sabbatical, officially the baton had already been passed. He was already lead pastor. Now I was taking a role that was supporting him. And he and I talked every week. We had a 1-hour meeting every week. And we talked about the 3 P's: power, prestige, and preference. What does that mean? He would say, how you doing? How you doing with the power thing? And the power thing, that's not a great word, because it sounds like it's not, a good word, power. It sounds like that's trouble. But what we're talking about is this. When you're the lead pastor and you're sitting in a meeting, you have some level of power. You have some authority. And when you're not, you don't. And when I came back, I'm sitting in a worship planning meeting. And we're talking about the service that's coming up in a couple of weeks. And we have a brand new director of worship. Brand new. Hadn't been there for long at all. And what was being planned was not the right, it wasn't good. It would be, that was hard. That was really, really hard. Because I wanted to say, I understand how you feel about it, but we're going to do it this way. I couldn't. I didn't have that power anymore. I couldn't pull. I was not one to pull the senior pastor card very often, but I couldn't do it. I didn't have it. And I remember talking to Greg about that. Oof, that's hard. Prestige is like kind of how people look at you and how you feel about kind of. You're not in the spotlight. You're not in the limelight anymore. In fact, 5 years from now, when you walk in the hallway of the church, half the people won't even know who you are. You were the senior pastor for 29 years. You got to get ready for the fact that it's not about you. And yet, you is you. You just have to know that. It's hard. My first day back from sabbatical, go into the office. I'm excited. It's my first day back after 9 months. I'm excited, And we have Monday through Thursday, first thing not necessarily the first thing, but at 9 o'clock in the morning, anybody that's in the office that wants to shows up for a stand-up meeting. And there might be 12, 15, 20 of us, depending on who's there. And we'd go around the circle and we'd say, okay, what's the one thing on your schedule today that you're really excited about, that you want us to pray about? And then the other thing would be just if you had to pick one movie to watch for the rest of your life, what would it be? Just stupid stuff like that. So anyway, I go into the stand-up meeting. I'm excited. 9 months, I haven't been there. And we have the stand-up meeting. And it's, okay, all right. And we do our little cheer at the end. And all of the strategic team members go into the conference room. And I watched that happen. And I wasn't a part of that. And I walked back to my office, my little tiny office, because I didn't have the big office anymore. I walked in. I can still remember doing this. And I did it almost on purpose. I put my hands on the desk and I went like this. It's like, I am nobody. It's how I felt. It was strange. I hadn't had that feeling in, I don't know, maybe my whole life. It was important that I could talk about that. And then the third P, preference, is just like, I'm just going to, I would prefer that you not do it that way, Greg, but it's no big deal. It's just preference. And that one we only had one issue on that where I remember telling him, I don't know if I do it that way, but it's your call. So communicate. And then finally, I don't know, behind prayer, is this the most important? I call it the 2 H's, honor and humility, which is get over yourself. So recently had a conversation with a young pastor who's succeeding the senior pastor who had been at this church for 35 years, planted the church 35 years, and now he was moving towards retirement, which is going to happen in August of this year. And I was talking to the young pastor that's coming in and asking how things are going, and basically this is a guy that is going to have an extremely difficult time leaving or not being senior pastor anymore. And I don't know if he realizes it. And he's really, isn't this crazy? Like, if you're the pastor of a church for 35 years, what have you been doing for 35 years? You've been doing everything that you can, hopefully, to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, move that church in mission towards reaching more people for Christ, advancing the kingdom of God. You've been doing that for 35 years. You care a lot about that. How bad it would be if in your retirement you cared more about how people are going to look at you and how they're going to remember you and how important you are than you would about what you've been trying to do for 35 years. And I'm just going to tell you, if that is what's inside of you, you really need to have a conversation with God and a counselor and I don't know who else to get over yourself. Because if that's you, you will sabotage whatever's going to happen next. It can't be about you. There has to be humility on both parts. Also heard of a Lutheran church, LCMS church, they're interviewing for the successor, the young guy coming in. They got 2 candidates. They bring the young candidate in, and they say, so, gosh, how do you feel about coming in and filling the shoes of Pastor so-and-so, had been there, who was a hero, icon, hero pastor in the LCMS. How do you feel about, coming in and filling his shoes? And the answer of the young man was, I'll bring my own shoes. Now, I don't know how he said it. He might have said it like, I'll bring my own shoes. Or he might have said it like, I'll bring my own shoes. I don't know how he said it, but I know how I took it. And I wouldn't take that very well. Now, does he need to be secure enough to be in his own shoes? Absolutely. But here's what Greg said to that question when somebody from our call committee asked him that. Greg, Mark's been here for 29 years. He's kind of everybody, a lot of people know about him. And King of Kings, how do you feel about filling his shoes? And Greg just says, I could never fill Mark's shoes. I just hope to stand on his shoulders and take it from where he gives the baton to me and take it further. And I was like, that's a good answer. It wasn't just an answer, that was his heart. It's one reason why I think it's worked at King of Kings is Greg and I have both. It's hard to talk about yourself like I've been humble, because that seems like that disqualifies what I just said. But we've both shown humility by basically honoring the other guy. And I think that's one big reason why it's worked. Every now and then I'll talk to a pastor that's going out, and I'll find a way to ask, so what are your thoughts on the guy coming in after you? I I have to ask the question carefully because I don't want it to sound like the question I'm really trying to ask. But the question I'm really trying to ask is, do you think the guy coming in after you can take the church further than you've taken it? And I'm telling you what, if the pastor that's retiring has an answer to that question that isn't, yes, I truly believe the guy coming in after me will take this church further than I could ever take it, it's going to be a problem. And in that case, I would recommend to that pastor who's retired, you should move about 1,000 miles away. Because it's always going to be hard for the guy coming in if he's there. I'd also recommend for situations where the relationship between the guy coming in and the guy going out is solid, and that's a great story for the church. And like Sharon and I have been there in Omaha now 30 years. All our friends are there. I would feel desperately sad if the process that we would have went through, the board would have said to us, as the board has said to some pastors at retirement, you can't come here anymore. That would kill us. Now, it might be the right thing in some cases, right? Are you hearing what I'm saying about it? If that guy really does feel that way, he probably does need to leave. So anyway, it goes into that one size fits all. There's no church that's the same. There's no recommendation that's the same. Every one of them are different. But I think this last one is huge. And I would say, in those cases where the retiring pastor goes out and the incoming guy comes in, and that pastor doesn't move but stays there, I think 75% at least of successful leadership transition has to do with the fact that those two guys have a great relationship. At least 75, maybe more. And we have that. But we worked at it. So, all right. So that's our situation. I'll say a couple other wrap-up things, then we can do Q&A. One of the sheets that you have on your chair is kind of letting you know about a webinar that's coming up, that if what you've heard today you think it would be helpful for other people on your staff or your team to hear, that's a webinar on March, I think it's the 16th. The QR code will take you to that webinar. You can register for free. I'm actually doing it with my son, the famous Zehnder, the Red Letter Challenge Zehnder, my son Zach, and we're doing that podcast. Also, I'm doing a conference special, if you will, for best practices, that if you and or others would like to follow this conference up down the road with a consultation, a Zoom consultation for an hour, I'll do that for anybody that's here, anybody at the conference. And that would be a way that you could involve other people that aren't with you that you might think they'd be helpful. It'd be helpful for them to hear this. The webinar is going to be a lot of what we just talked about, so that's a way to you can get other people involved. Okay, let me stop and see what kind of questions that you might have. In the back, Jeff.
So you shared that back in 2017-ish, you were calling these four guys, or considering these four guys. I'm presuming, and that people knew that possibly you were 62, that big back in COVID. I'm presuming you hadn't announced retirement at that point.
Not to the congregation. I had not announced retirement in 2017.
But your board knew.
The board knew.
That it was coming at like a specific date, or did they know?
Not a specific date, but yeah, but pretty close. I said like November 2022, so not a specific date, but yeah. The board knew.
The committee knew what they were doing.
The call committee, yes, the call committee knew what the situation was. Yeah.
So then, okay, so I wasn't thinking they knew that. So when you met Greg and all that,
Mm-hmm.
it was clear, the time frame was pretty clear by then.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So that was years in advance, so not like a one-year thing, it was a longer
Yeah.
thing.
So
Was the plan also clear when you called Greg the 9-month sabbatical, the coming back, here's your 5 jobs, was all that laid out, or was that something you did with Greg later, or how did that work?
So when our call committee first talked to Greg, what we communicated to him was different from what we communicated the year before to all those other candidates. Now we were going by faith, believing that God was bringing us my successor. We just had to go by faith. That was clear. And we said, Greg, if you accept the call, here's what it's going to mean. And all that was laid out for him.
Your sabbatical, you're not.
The whole thing. Now the funny thing is, I was involved in the conversations with the board all the way along, but I knew that they had talked about, we think when Greg comes that you need to have a time of transition, and after that we're going to probably send you on a sabbatical. That much I knew. I didn't know how long the transition would be, nor did I know how long the sabbatical would be. So when they talked with Greg, and they said, we're thinking that maybe 3 months transition for you and Mark. And then they told him about the 9-month sabbatical thing. Well, Greg called me up and he said, do you know about the plan? And I said, well, all I know is that we want a transition period of time and then a sabbatical. And he said, well, they're saying like 3 months. I think it should be 5. I think we should just go through the end of the year. And I said, I do too. He said, well, let's tell him that. So we told the board, Greg and I have talked, we think it should be 5. They went, great. You guys talked? Fine, 5 months. And it was clean because it was January he would go. On that note, after 1 month, I started putting Greg in charge. After 1 month. 5 months it was official to the congregation, but after 1 month, we were in September starting the budgeting plan for 2020 and the whole vision for the year. And it's like, why would I lead that? I'm gone. So I said, Greg, I think you should lead that. He said, yeah, I probably should. So that time of 5 months, the transition was all happening. Here's the next thing. And I'm going to get to a question that somebody has to have. And the question is, so you came back for 2 years under Greg. I'm assuming you were paid. Yes, I was paid. I said to the board, when this was all shaken out, I said, guys, I don't know what to do about this, but I want to let you know that my plan all along has been to retire full-time when I get to be 67. And if you believe, and I believe, that for the sake of the church and the mission of the church, if we believe it's better for the young guy to come sooner rather than later, we have an issue with that. If it's sooner, we have an issue. The sooner issue is, what are you going to do with me? And I don't want to be out of a job. And let's talk about that. What does that look like, right? And I said, so I'm willing to step aside, and I'm willing to sacrifice that part for me, but I don't want to be out of a job. And they talked about it, prayed about it, and for 2 years they paid my senior pastor salary, didn't cut it at all. Actually gave me 2% increases those 2 years. And they paid him the senior pastor salary that they were kind of the entrance level senior pastor salary that he got. And it was the wisest financial decision a church could make. And that doesn't seem like it adds up, right? Mathematically. I'll tell you why it adds up. I know of 2 other situations where the pastors were going to retire. They actually had the young guy on staff. In one case, they were concerned that the young guy was going to get a call and leave there and go to another church. And the pastor, about my age, didn't want to retire early. But he also thought the young guy that was on staff could be his successor. So they brought somebody in, and the board worked with him, and my friend worked with him. And lo and behold, they came to a decision. They said, we do think it's the right thing for the young guy to be the senior pastor. And so we're going to do that, and sorry, you know, you won't have a position here at the church anymore. Yeah. In another case, the pastor said, I want to retire in July. And they had the young guy, and they met, and the board talked about it, and they said, we think we probably should give it to the new guy. And they came to the guy, the pastor that had been there for like 30 years, who wanted to retire in July. And they said, we've met, we've talked, and we do believe that young man so-and-so should be senior pastor. So we're going to go ahead and have you retire 6 months early. Now, 6 months, okay, 6 months doesn't sound like a long time. But the pastor's wife was hurt to the core. And like 30 years, and they're talking this amount of money for 6 months. And guess what? She couldn't hide it. She couldn't fake it. And when her friends were asking her, what's wrong? Like she said, I can't talk about it. Well, then they found out, and guess what happened? That pastor and that pastor's wife couldn't go to that church anymore. And guess what? Their friends couldn't go to that church anymore. And they left, and guess what they took when they left the church? The wallet. So it's like you got to really think through this whole financial thing and understand that in the short term, what might seem like it works mathematically, in the long term could be the worst thing you possibly could do. And Sharon and I, we retired. Congregation celebrated our retirement. I know guys that have been at their churches for so long, they retire, and they get this send-off that's just pathetic. Like, it's like, are you kidding me? A pen and pencil set after 25 years? And you think I'm kidding. I'm not kidding. The church blessed our socks off. So whenever we talk about, so how did it go for you at King? It's like, unbelievable. So what does that do? It just fosters just great positive sort of feelings about the whole process. I don't know if I answered your question, Jeff.